Well, hello there, and welcome to day 118 of A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And as I said yesterday, I'm continuing my slightly more low-key, whatever Netflix throws at me kind of week of not overly complex watching, at least from my perspective. And today, for my documentary of the week, I have decided to take a look at Fyre, the greatest festival that never was. And I am actually astounded by this. This is I don't know, like a calamity, the kind of which would only exist now, and yet simultaneously you would never think could exist. So, it follows the Fyre Festival, which was launched by a guy named Billy McFarland, alongside the rapper Ja Rule, and was supposed to be this great revolutionary festival experience in the Bahamas where all the richest of the rich young people can go and party with the greatest celebrities, with the best music artists performing. It was supposed to be the Woodstock of the modern age, and it ended up being one of the the great fails to such a degree, and lessons in hubris to such a degree that I feel like it will need to be talked about for years to come, perhaps decades, because it's really a presentation of, I suppose, the modern era of the overly arrogant, overconfident, wealthy, and how no matter how much money you throw at something, it doesn't replace the ability to for hard work, creative input, collaborative effort that is required for events like this to be successful. Now, this whole thing is mired in controversy. The event itself is controversial. The people behind it are controversial, but even the documentaries that were made about it are controversial. So this is one of two documentaries. This is the Netflix one, Fyre, the greatest festival that never was, and then you also have the Hulu documentary Fyre Fraud, and they are an interesting example of two different perspectives on the same event, and they would have made a really great side by side in terms of the art of the documentarian breaking down an event and the circumstances around it and the perception of it from two very different angles, and I'll go into more of that shortly. But this is also mired in controversy in relationship between these two productions. So, as I say, it follows this documentary follows Billy McFarland, this revolutionary creative genius who, at the age of 25, had set up his own sort of very similar to like a black card credit card company for the wealthy to be able to enjoy exclusive events and premium offers. And the company was called something like Magnesium or Magnesia or something. And so this guy was 25. He'd set up a media company called Fyre, and had gotten Ja Rule teamed up with him. And between them, they had decided, we want to throw a big event in the Bahamas. They essentially bought an island in the Bahamas, or at least paid such a high amount of money to have access to it that they may as well have bought it. Millions we're talking. They built this big promotion marketing strategy where it's all about getting these top level supermodels to party with Ja Rule to demonstrate that, this is going to be the best event ever. Put that all over social media, and then of course led to he's like, this is going to be a phenomenal event, you need to get your tickets to this. And of course, people young people were paying thousands of pounds to fly and attend this festival. Now, of the two documentaries, this is the one that's very much the inner workings documentary. It's structured around talking heads with people involved with the planning, development, and launching of the festival. And I suppose really this seems like a good place to talk about the controversy between the documentaries. So, whereas, like I say, this one is more an inside perspective on the on how the festival came about and exactly how it collapsed. There is the Hulu documentary, which is much more the outsider's perspective, or at least a dual perspective, which is the perception of the Fyre Festival from a social media platform, how it was advertised, how people saw it, what they were expecting, and then what it failed to be. And coupled with that, Hulu had access to Billy McFarland himself and had the opportunity to interview him and talk about what he wanted this festival to be, and so on and so forth. And immediately, considering both of these documentaries are being released practically at the same time, this is a case of two different entities, both trying to tell the same story and both turning to the other saying, well, actually, this one is not the truest account. So, Netflix, I think, started the mudslinging by claiming that that Hulu had paid Billy McFarland to attend the interviews, and that's how they got access to him. Now, Hulu denied this, but Hulu in turn said that Netflix, and this is even said, this is more just a pointing out of public record, which is the Netflix documentary was produced, at least co-produced, by a company called Jerry Media. Now, Jerry Media was the next phase of a company an Instagram company, marketing company called Fuck Jerry, and that company was involved prominently in the marketing of the Fyre Festival. And a man named Mitch Pusniak claimed that, who was very much involved in the oversight of the marketing for the Fyre Festival, claimed that he had final say on the Netflix documentary, on the final cut. Now, Chris Smith, the director, and Netflix have said, well, he had some input, but he didn't have final say on what went in and what, and that was very much part of or at least I understand that's very much part of the negotiation to get access to people like Andy King, who was supposed to really be the overseer of the whole event, and of course higher level people, the ability to talk to them about it. And frankly, I'm sure there are good and bad aspects on both sides, and it's a demonstration that, in spite of the way that documentaries are often presented, documentaries are not statements of fact, that they are crafted, that they are perspective-based, and that you cannot have an objective documentary that lays out, an unbiased presentation of a person or an event or whatever study it's trying to make. And so, I wouldn't. My frustration, I think, and why I'm slightly veering more towards Netflix, and why Netflix will be the one I talk about, is the fact that Hulu, and this isn't necessarily the fault of the documentary or Hulu itself, but there is no international distribution for this. So in the UK, I can't watch this legally, the Fyre Fraud documentary. And therefore I'm not going to. I can't, I'm not going to source it. I'm not going to go to too much effort to find it. But it would have been wonderful to see that side by side of these two documentaries and sort of do that comparison. So I can only really talk from having seen the Netflix one. And frankly, if this was a PR stunt to try to redeem people and the production company behind Fyre Festival, I don't know if it did that good a job, because they don't come across as if somehow, we were manipulated and exploited just as much as the people who were involved in this, from a performance perspective, the artists, or the people who bought tickets, or even the investors who were fraudulently lost them, were oversold by Billy McFarland. They are trying to tell the story from their account, and of course they do somewhat push the blame away from themselves. Not entirely, but some of them say, look, I just did my job, or someone else said, well, I came into this disaster at a point where I was just trying to save it. I don't think there's anyone who gave an interview on it who said, yep, I was prominently involved, it was just as much my fault as it was his, because, well, that's libelous. So, it is very subjective, but it does give you the inside scoop. It does give you these people saying, well, when I came into the process, this is what was going on. And we have access to the footage of throughout the whole process of it being made, from the initial promo through to the construction of it, through to all the things that went wrong. We get access to seeing all of those things through, the fact that everything is filmed and documented and put on social media. And as I mentioned in the last documentary I covered, we're in an age now where you can construct entire documentaries purely from the fact that we, as a society, film everything. We constantly are documenting everything we're doing. And an event like this was, they had a documentary team constantly with them. They were filming themselves. There's tons of footage with Billy, with Ja Rule, with everyone involved, with the ups and downs of it. And that in itself, having access to that is, worth it, just because I think it's almost a see to be believed situation. Because this is the demonstration of, as I came away, I was thinking, well, this is the Emperor's New Festival meets the Pied Piper of the Bahamas, where this is a case of someone who knows. People who were interviewed, some of them had said, oh, this Billy guy was a maverick, and he was a great salesman, and he was one of these Silicon Valley type guys who came in, had brilliant ideas, and it was just a question of whether it could be achieved. But this is someone. The problem is the idea that someone who was, like I say, he was 25. He's the same age as I am now. So he's 29 now, and I am 29 now. So he was 25 when he tried to launch this. Him and Ja Rule, Ja Rule is like any other musical artist. They are constantly swept in by the fame and by the success, and of course they are a creative person who is trying to, make all of these things happen. But between the two of them, with no oversight, or barely any oversight, all of a sudden they thought that as long as they had the money, they could do whatever they wanted. And what would happen is, no one would say no to them. And then, if, say, a third party, like the initial site that they wanted to rent, said no or rejected them, for instance, so the initial site that they were going to host the festival were very keen that they didn't advertise Pablo Escobar and the fact that this was Pablo Escobar's island. They were trying to obviously get away from that image. And immediately they advertise the fact that this is Pablo Escobar's island, and when you come to this festival, you'll get to have the Pablo Escobar experience, which is just a level of poor decision making that it's astounding. And of course, immediately the location manager or whoever oversaw that said, "Get out! You're no longer allowed to use this site." So they had to find a backup site. And this is like a few months before the festival happens, and they are constructing everything. They have promised people villas that don't exist. That artists music artists have especially high profile ones, have very specific specifications about what type of stage and setup they will perform on, because it's part of their brand. These didn't exist, so they also had to be built from scratch. There was no way to get the guests, the paying guests to the location, and from it there was no idea about how they could cope with the capacity of 6,000 people, and all of these things are going on. And so, as I say, what would happen is people would just go along with whatever Billy or Ja Rule said. No one could say no to them, but when something like that happened, where someone does say you can't use this anymore, they wouldn't take stock of that. They would essentially assume that this was it's fine, we'll find an alternative way to deal with this. And yes, possibly that's a good management strategy, to go, okay, we'll find a new solution. However, because that happened again and again and again, there came a point where it was just there just wasn't that level of this couldn't be salvaged. And frankly, it's astounding, because they had requests of things that that were demands that they expected, demands that their artists who were going to perform expected, demands that the guests were expectations that the guests had, because they are paying customers. And all of these things at once were just not happening. And there is this great story that Andy King tells, who was brought in later on to essentially try to... I think he was something like an event coordinator, essentially. But his job was essentially to run it from behind, whereas Billy and Ja Rule are the mavericks who just demand everything. Andy King, I believe, his job was to make it happen as much as possible and coordinate it and oversee it. And there is a great story that I won't spoil here, because it is a little bit of an explicit story, but about the issues they had with trying to get Evian, giant tankers of Evian water past customs. And it's the level of what Andy King believed he was going to have to do was so shocking, and the fact that he was so willing to do it for the sake of trying to save this festival, it shows the fact that this was so out of control, and yet no one was acknowledging that this couldn't work until it happened, and then they immediately knew it couldn't work. I mean, this was also an event where people were constantly being fired. There were teams of people saying, if someone said, we can't do this, if, there's this site manager who essentially was saying, who said, we can't get the villas, and then, originally, because it was supposed to be on a yacht, that the guests would stay on a yacht, would party on the beach and do the festival on the beach, and then be staying on a yacht. And when that idea got thrown out, because for whatever reason, it was like, okay, we're going to put them up in villas, but the villas didn't exist, or there weren't enough. And then they went, okay, well, the people who have, and at this point, people have paid for what they believe are villas. And then the villas they said, well, we're just going to put tents up. And the site manager said, I literally, the night that they told me that, I went onto that beach, stayed on a tent with my wife, spoke to them the next day, said, it can't be done. It can't be, this is an unlivable climate to stay on a tent with. But because he said we can't do this, him and his team got fired, new team got brought in. And it's that level of, it reminds me a little bit of The Room with Tommy Wiseau, and when you watch The Escape Artist, is it The Escape Artist? The Disaster Artist, and the idea that, now Tommy Wiseau is already, is outwardly an eccentric person who you would go, oh, that guy's a bit left of centre, a bit one match short of a box kind of situation, where you go, well, there's something strange about the guy in the first place, but very similar. Whereas Billy McFarland was your Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg type, who sort of looked young and slick and looked like they knew what they were doing, and so people just assumed he knew what he was doing. Anyway, it's a great documentary. I mean, it is... I look forward to the day that they make films and TV series about this from almost like a comedy perspective. I mean, it's not funny in some regards. It's funny for a bit, and then when you realise that, oh, hundreds of people's salary, people were expecting to get paid. There were people who put money into this. There were people who flew out, who, guests who spent a lot of money, turned up, and then were actually put in quite a dangerous situation. It actually, the film goes from, comedy, like I say, disaster artist style, like head scratcher, to quite serious, almost Lord of the Flies-esque, oh, people are actually in danger here who shouldn't be, to almost like a legal drama section to it. And so, yeah, it's funny until it's not. And then you realise, oh, people lost a lot of money. Local people were supposed to get paid, and there were a lot of them who worked on this who didn't. And, people were put into danger because they went to an event that they thought was perfectly normal. Turns out it was actually not. And so it's a fascinating documentary, and even the stuff I've said doesn't touch the surface of how much content there is regarding the madness of this. So I do strongly recommend watching this. And maybe at some point I will get round to watching Fyre Fraud, if it's available or I can find a way to watch it. But for now, this is if I'm going to point to one, I'm going to point to this and say, if you want the inside perspective, this documentary is remarkable in seeing something that you'd think, this couldn't exist, this couldn't have happened this way, and showing how in the modern age that, just because someone is brilliant and rich doesn't mean they get to it doesn't mean that proper procedure and professionalism and experience is somehow unnecessary. So, genuinely remarkable. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that little bell to get notifications when new uploads go up. Follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley. Do please check out the 100+ videos that I've already put up, and I'm always sharing new videos on Twitter as well. Thank you for joining me. Take care.